You can lose weight everywhere on your body and still keep belly fat. Your face gets leaner, your arms get tighter, your legs shrink, but your stomach, it barely moves. And the strange part is, this isn't a dieting mistake, it's psychology. Because the fat around your stomach is not treated the same way as fat anywhere else on your body. Your brain protects it differently, your hormones defend it differently, and the deeper you go into a fat loss phase, the harder your body will fight to keep it. Which is why millions of people experience the exact same pattern. The first few weeks of dieting feel amazing. The scale drops quickly, clothes start fitting better, then something strange happens. Everything slows down except the belly fat. It just stays there, almost like your body refuses to let it go. And the reason for that starts in a place most people never think about when it comes to fat loss. Your brain. Your brain has a map of your body fat. Your brain doesn't see body fat the way you see it in the mirror. It sees it as energy security. For almost all of human history, food was unpredictable. Periods of abundance were followed by long periods of scarcity. Your ancestors survived because their bodies developed systems that could store energy efficiently and protect it when food became scarce. And not all fat storage was equal. Some fat depots were considered expendable. Others were considered strategic reserves, and the fat around your stomach became one of the most protected reserves your body has. From a survival standpoint, belly fat is incredibly useful. It sits close to vital organs. It's easy for the body to access when energy is needed, and it acts like a biological emergency battery during long periods without food. So when you start dieting, your body doesn't immediately think, great, let's burn the belly fat. Instead, it thinks something completely different. Food availability might be declining, and that changes the entire strategy your body uses to lose fat. The first fat you lose is the least important. In the early stages of fat loss, your body burns what researchers sometimes call easy fat. Fat stored in places like the face, arms, and upper body tends to release energy more readily. The fat cells in those areas respond quickly to fat-burning signals in the bloodstream, which is why the first few weeks of a diet can feel incredibly encouraging. The scale drops, your jawline becomes sharper, your clothes feel looser, but under the surface, something else is happening at the same time. Your body is taking inventory. Hormones begin tracking how much energy is coming in, how much is being burned, and how quickly your fat stores are declining. And if the brain decides that fat loss is happening too quickly, it starts activating protective mechanisms. This is where the belly fat problem begins. Belly fat is hormone resistant. Fat cells are not passive storage containers. They're metabolically active. Each fat cell contains receptors that determine how easily that fat can be released and burned. And the fat cells in your stomach have a very unusual receptor balance. They contain a high concentration of what scientists call alpha-2 adrenergic receptors. These receptors act like brakes. When fat-burning hormones such as adrenaline enter the bloodstream, these receptors slow down the release of stored fat. In other words, the signal to burn fat arrives, but belly fat cells partially ignore it. Other fat cells respond quickly, belly fat resists, which is why people often notice the same frustrating pattern. Their body is clearly losing fat, just not where they want it most. But biology is only part of the story, because the psychology of dieting itself actually makes this problem worse. Dieting changes your brain's risk calculation. Your brain constantly tries to predict the future. When food intake suddenly drops because you start a diet or calorie deficit, the brain interprets that as a potential signal of food scarcity, and scarcity triggers protective behaviors. Metabolism slows slightly, hunger signals increase, and the body becomes more conservative with its most valuable fat stores. From an evolutionary perspective, this is a brilliant survival mechanism. Imagine an early human experiencing declining food availability. If their body burned the most strategic fat stores immediately, they would run out of energy too quickly during famine. Instead, the body burns easier fat first, while holding on to deeper reserves for later. And for many people, belly fat is one of those reserves. But here's the part most people don't realize. The longer you stay consistent with fat loss, the more likely your body eventually has to use those reserves, which means the belly fat problem isn't really about difficulty, it's about timing. Why belly fat is usually the last to go. Most fat loss journeys follow a predictable pattern. Phase 1 is rapid progress. Phase 2 is slower but steady fat loss. Phase 3 is the stubborn phase. This is where most people start believing something is wrong. Their diet hasn't changed, their workouts haven't changed, but the fat loss seems to stall. And because the belly is often the last major fat depot remaining, it becomes the most visible reminder that progress has slowed. Psychologically, this is where most people quit. Not because the system stopped working, but because the final stage of fat loss looks like failure. And that's where patience becomes the most powerful fat loss tool most people never develop. Because something interesting happens if someone stays consistent long enough. Eventually, the body runs out of alternatives. The body eventually turns to belly fat. Once easier fat depots shrink, the body has fewer options left. Energy still needs to come from somewhere. And when the remaining fat stores become limited, the body slowly starts mobilizing the areas it protected earlier. This is when people suddenly notice something surprising. After weeks of slow progress, their stomach finally starts shrinking. sometimes rapidly. The reason is simple. Once the body has exhausted the easy fat stores, the protective barrier around belly fat begins to weaken. The fat cells that once resisted release eventually start responding to fat-burning signals. But this stage only happens if someone stays consistent long enough to reach it. And this is where the psychology of dieting becomes the real challenge. Because the hardest part of fat loss isn't burning fat. It's believing progress is still happening when it becomes less visible. Stress makes belly fat even harder to lose. There's another factor that makes belly fat uniquely stubborn. Stress. When your body experiences chronic stress, it releases a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol has a complicated relationship with fat storage. In short bursts, it helps release energy. But when cortisol stays elevated for long periods, it begins encouraging fat storage around the abdominal area. This is why researchers often notice a strong connection between high stress levels and increased belly fat. It's not just about calories, it's about how the body allocates energy under stress. Sleep deprivation, long work hours, emotional stress, and chronic dieting can all elevate cortisol levels. And when cortisol stays high, the body becomes even more protective of belly fat, which creates a frustrating loop. Stress makes belly fat harder to lose. Struggling to lose belly fat increases stress, and that stress feeds the cycle. Breaking that cycle is one of the most overlooked parts of fat loss, because sometimes the fastest way to reduce belly fat isn't another workout. It's better sleep, lower stress, and a system that your body doesn't interpret as a survival threat. The illusion of spot reduction. At this point, many people start searching for a shortcut, a specific workout, a targeted exercise, a special diet designed to burn belly fat faster. But decades of research have shown the same consistent finding. You cannot choose where fat leaves your body first. Fat loss is controlled by systemic hormones and genetics, not individual exercises. Doing hundreds of crunches might strengthen your abdominal muscles, but it doesn't tell your body where to pull fat from. Your body decides that on its own, which means the most effective strategy for losing belly fat isn't targeting the stomach directly. It's creating conditions where the body has no choice but to keep burning fat overall, eventually reaching the reserves it once protected. Why? Some people lose belly fat faster. Not everyone experiences the same pattern. Some people lose belly fat relatively early during weight loss. Others keep it almost until the very end. The difference often comes down to genetics and fat distribution. Some bodies store more fat in the hips and legs, others store more around the abdomen. But the underlying system is still the same. Your body burns fat according to its own internal priorities, not your visual preferences, which means comparing your progress to someone else's body can be extremely misleading, because their body might simply prioritize different fat stores. The moment most people quit. There is a point in almost every fat loss journey where progress becomes painfully slow. Weeks go by with minimal visible change. Motivation drops. Doubt starts creeping in, and the brain begins looking for a reason to stop. Maybe the diet isn't working. Maybe the body is stuck. Maybe genetics make it impossible. But often the reality is something much simpler. The person has reached the stage where belly fat is the final major reserve remaining, and the body is slowly working through it. If they continue, they eventually reach the stage where the stomach begins shrinking. But if they quit here, they never see that phase, and the mind remembers the experience as proof that fat loss doesn't work. The strange psychological shift. Interestingly, people who successfully lose belly fat often report a similar psychological shift. At some point, they stop obsessing over the stomach entirely. They focus on the process instead: consistency, sleep, nutrition, movement. When attention shifts away from daily visual progress, the stress around fat loss decreases, and ironically, that reduction in stress often improves the hormonal environment needed for fat loss. Lower stress, lower cortisol, more stable energy balance. The system begins working again, and eventually the belly fat starts to move. What this means for you. If you've ever felt like your belly fat refuses to disappear, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means your body is following a biological strategy that evolved thousands of years before modern dieting existed. Your brain protects certain fat reserves, your hormones regulate where fat is released first, and your psychology determines whether you stay consistent long enough to reach the final stage. Belly fat isn't impossible to lose, it's just patient fat. It waits longer than the rest. The real secret most people miss: people love complicated fat loss strategies, special meal plans, advanced supplements, exotic workout systems. But when researchers examine long-term fat loss success, the most consistent factor isn't any specific method. It's time spent in a consistent energy deficit, not extreme dieting, not perfection. Just steady progress maintained long enough for the body to work through every fat depot it once protected, eventually reaching the belly. And once that stage arrives, the change can feel surprisingly sudden. The same stomach that seemed frozen for weeks begins shrinking, and people often describe the experience as if their body finally unlocked. But in reality, the system was working the entire time. They just hadn't reached the final stage yet. Final thought. So if you're currently losing weight everywhere except your stomach, you may actually be closer to the finish line than you think. Because the psychology of belly fat isn't about failure, it's about endurance. Your body burns easy fat first, protected fat last. And the people who eventually lose belly fat are usually the ones who stayed consistent just a little longer than everyone else.